The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericahealth.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive with Dr. Rebecca Risk. Do you ever feel that even though nothing seems seriously wrong and you pass all the medical tests, that you still feel that your health, pain, and fatigue are completely out of control? It doesn't have to be that way. Listen to the tips and suggestions given on our program today and take back control of your health. Now, here is Dr. Rebecca Risk.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Today, we're speaking with investigative journalist Scott Carney. He was a contributing editor at Wired for 5 years, and his writing also appeared in Mother Jones, Men's Journal, Playboy, Foreign Policy, Discover, Outside, and Fast Company. His work has been the subject of a variety of radio and television programs, including on NPR and National Geographic. Today, we're discussing his book, What Doesn't Kill Us. So, Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Rebecca.
So, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I had been, I'm an investigative journalist, and for the prior about 6 years to when I started this book, I had been investigating sort of corruption around the world, and I was getting interested I had just written a book about people who follow sort of spiritual ideas to their sort of end result. And in particular, I was interested in sort of false gurus, people who promise they can give you superpowers through meditation or prayer, make you rich through positive thinking, that sort of thing. And I had followed the story of this guy who had followed one of these gurus until who promised that he could become an angel just by meditating. And this ended with him dying by meditation in the deserts of Arizona. He literally died of dehydration in the deserts of Arizona, pursuing these sort of lofty spiritual goals. Meanwhile, the guru who had told him these promises was getting rich off of these sort of spiritual claims and had amassed a big following. So I wrote a book called The Death on Diamond Mountain about this sort of really charlatan-esque spirituality out there. And so with that in mind, when I heard about this guy named Wim Hof, who's this Dutch fitness guru living in Poland and in the Netherlands, 2 places, he had made these claims that he could teach you through meditation to become immune to the elements, to be able to control your body temperature at will, to be able to control your immune system at will. And I figured that he was basically lying. He was trying to accumulate money by offering sort of these false claims, and I went out to disprove him. But it turned out, once I was there, I found out that Wim Hof is actually a surprisingly interesting person, is not motivated personally by money. His claims that he could teach you to, roll in the snow and sort of exist in the Arctic without any clothing ended up being true. In about a week, I, found myself sort of in this frigid winter environment, standing in my bathing suit for an hour at a time, sweating. And it just was really surprising that he was able to develop this method that was accurate. So What Doesn't Kill Us comes out of that initial meeting. It was a story that ended up in Playboy magazine. And it's sort of been a wild ride ever since.
Well, I think anybody listening who's hearing you talk about rolling around in the snow is probably having the same reaction that you did. That's just crazy. I mean, I live where there's snow 6 months out of the year pretty much, and I think you're crazy. Mm-hmm. I put boots on before I go out in the snow. I don't go out there barefoot the way you did.
Sure.
So just tell us what happened when you went to go and you spent some time with him. What happened there?
Well, the first thing is I get off the plane in this town called Wroclaw, and, you meet Wim Hof, and he is a, sort of short, ruddy face sort of guy with a big bulbous nose, and he had like a green hat on that made him look like a garden gnome. Not a very impressive figure when you first meet him. And we take this, I think it was about a 2-hour drive from there to the Carconoze Mountains, and where he has this sort of little training center. And there were about 2 other guys with me in the car. And the first thing I remember is, we got out of the car and we sort of shoved our rucksacks in this sort of dilapidated house that he uses for a training center. And it's on the second floor where where the room is that I was staying. And I looked out the window and there was this guy, this American dude named Andrew, I later learned, standing in his underwear in the middle of the snowy field, throwing snow on himself, and there was steam coming up off of his body. And I was, shocked as, why would anyone want to stay outside in the middle of this winter? This is the winter that stopped the Nazi army. It's like really, really cold outside, and this guy's just sort of happily throwing snow on himself. And like you, I thought this guy was crazy. And yet, these people who were doing it were, seemed pretty happy. And, while the other people in the sort of group were really energized by the idea because they were already gotten the idea in their head that cold could be useful and even fun, they went out and started doing the same thing. And I was still reticent, obviously, until I started hanging out with Wim Hof. And, what he suggests is that, our species, where we come from, we're about 200,000 years old, humans are. And in that time, we constantly dealt with environmental variation. We dealt with extreme cold and extreme heat sort of on a continual basis. And that in order to do that, we had, physical powers to allow us to be able to do this, just sort of biological abilities to adapt to the environment. And now, in the present day, where we live with modern heating, electricity, all of these things that keep us comfortable, we look at those environmental variations as painful and as dangerous. But our bodies have evolved to be able to adapt to it. And it's really our lack of habituation to the environment which is the problem. And so what he's doing, what looks extreme from the outside, is actually just something that we're designed to be able to do. And, once I started learning that idea, it became very easy to start, at least conceptually going into the snow. And, at first it hurts because, I haven't been conditioned to it. For, most of us who live at 72 degrees all year round, that is an extreme shift. But as you get used to it, it becomes, quite easy to deal with what we would think is extreme weather, without very much technology to help us along.
Yeah, so when I was reading your book and reading about the extreme cold, of course, my first response is, well, I don't want to be uncomfortable. It's nice and cozy inside, and in the winter, last thing I want to do is go outside. I'm not a skier, so it's I think they get exposed to the elements a little more. But as I read your book over and it started to make sense, that we are meant to not be as comfortable as we are, and does seem to be one of our problems. Food is more available, we're not exercising enough, and in all of this putting into a category that we're just not challenging ourselves enough overall.
Right, exactly, and that our bodies are meant for variation. We evolved in constantly varying environments, and with all sorts of stimulus coming to us. And now that our lives are so easy, we look at that sort of challenge of existing as suffering, which is funny because this concept has only really appeared in the last, say, 100 or so years. That we can have most of our biological needs met by sort of industrial agriculture, by the heating, the electric company that sends both gas and electricity to the house, and what we're essentially doing is outsourcing biological capacity to the technology and the institutions that we've created. And in turn, by doing that, our bodies don't put in the effort to allow to build up the systems to, say, resist the environment, to resist the cold, and do these sorts of things. And that, fundamentally makes our biology weaker. It'd be the same as, say, if you never exercise, you just don't believe in exercise. You don't, want to go for a run or a bike ride or a hike or anything. The muscles that would allow you to do those things, to hike, or run or whatever, atrophy. And then that thing, the idea of, say, running 3 miles, becomes undue suffering, becomes sort of this impossible feat. And so what I'm suggesting in this book is that we look at temperature as equally as important as exercise, and that by exposing yourself to variations in the environment, you actually make this sort of hidden biology that deals with that temperature fluctuation a lot stronger.
So how did you become acclimatized to the cold? What happened in that week that made you more comfortable with it?
Well, it's really just this. It's a biological process. Like and it's quite rapid. Like the first day, we learn this Wim Hof breathing technique, and then I think we can go into that a little bit later for what that is. But essentially, after that, you go into the snow, or any sort of cold environment, and you just stand there. I mean, it's not a conscious thing. You just sort of stand there and resist that impulse to flee, that impulse to clench up and sort of protect yourself with your fight or flight responses, which is generally what you'll do first. You'll have this sort of clenching or shivering effect. You just try to resist that clenching and tell your body that, no, I'm safe, I'm going to be okay, and very quickly your body first realizes that it's not in extreme danger. Even at, let's see, what was it then? It was about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And the first day I'm out there, with bare feet in the snow. The feet hurt, right? They absolutely hurt because I had this vasoconstriction response where the veins in my feet and extremities clench, and because there's muscles that line the veins in your extremities, and in my life I'd never really done that. I'd never really exercised those vascular muscles. And after about 5 minutes, I was done. I had to go in and get heated up and warm myself. But the next day when I did it, it took 10 minutes until that same sort of feeling of clenching, that I couldn't resist sort of came in. And every day as I progressed with that small bit of exposure, it went from 10 minutes to 30 minutes to an hour at the end of a week that I could stand there and be comfortable in the environment. And our bodies are just made to be able to adapt. If you think about human evolution, the creatures that were able to adapt to their environment quickly were the ones who passed on their genes. It wasn't the ones who sort of saw this oncoming snowstorm or you changed in the weather and said, yeah, I'll get ready in 3 months to adapt to that. Those guys didn't pass on their genes. So this is sort of a power that we just have to adapt.
So once we adapt, why would we do this? What's the benefit of becoming used to being in the cold for an hour?
Sure. Well, lots of things. As I mentioned, you have these muscles lining your vascular system. You have 200,000 miles of tubing in your bodies, the arteries and veins that carry blood to and away from your heart. And the ones that are lined with muscles, mostly in your extremities, they're there for a reason. Like, you have those muscles in order to sort of adapt to the environment. And if you never use them, those muscles are weak. So just from a basic exercise idea, you should have stronger muscles than weaker muscles. And by improving those muscles, you not only allow yourself to adapt to the cold more comfortably, but you also literally strengthen your circulatory system. The other things that happen in the cold, beyond the muscular changes, are also metabolic changes. So the technique is to stay in this cold environment, whether it's the snow or a cold shower or a cold water or whatever it is, and then you relax in that, because your body has these two options to heat itself, right? It can heat itself with muscle activity, which is, if you can think about it, if you're running, you get really hot. That's just one of the ways we heat ourselves, is through the action of muscles. And when you clench, you're trying to heat yourself essentially. But what this method suggests is that you actually relax in that environment and instead force your body to find a different strategy to heat itself. And in this case, what that means is metabolic activity. So you start to burn white fat, so that spare tire that that many of us carry around our waist, and you can through a mitochondrial action, you will literally burn white fat directly for heat energy. So that's great. That's great for insulin regulation. That's great for just sort of staying trim, and it's also just strengthens this metabolic side of your body that we don't use on a daily basis because those needs are usually met by the environment that we're able to control.
So I'm glad you mentioned the part about relax, because when I was reading your book, I decided to go have a cold shower and see what that was like. And this is definitely not something that I enjoyed. But I felt better after. I didn't stay in it for very long, and I certainly didn't relax in it. But, I had more energy after. I'd been reading all afternoon, and it was pretty warm in the house. So it cleared my brain and made me feel a little better. So I can see some of those benefits. Definitely I need to work on the relaxing part, though.
well, what happens in a cold shower or any of these sort of fast cold situations, right, is that you'll start to release cortisol and epinephrine and adrenaline and these various sort of fight or flight stress hormones, which can feel really good, that can give you this sense of euphoria. But when you relax in it, you can sort of learn to control the release of those things because you're actually working on these unconscious processes in your body. So yeah, next time, sit there and try to get that point. If you're swimming in the ocean, right? If you go for swimming and sort of, a little colder than normal at first, people sort of like are very uncomfortable at first. But after they swim around for 5 minutes or so, the water starts to feel okay. And that's what you're trying to do in the cold shower. You're trying to get to that point where you recognize that water is cold, but you don't mind that it's cold. And it's something that's just more of a mental shift than a physical one.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break. We're talking today with Scott Carney about his book, What Doesn't Kill Us. We'll be back shortly.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
The largest syndicated alternative health talk program has come to the Voice America Network. The Dr. Bob Martin Show is the program that will answer your health questions and help you to heal your own body of many different ailments. Each week, you'll hear the answers that Dr. Bob gives to his callers that help them to be their own doctor most of the time. We'll also discuss developments on the healthcare front and what you need to do to keep your body in top form. The Dr. Bob Martin Show airs Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific on Voice America Health and Wellness.
The Voice America Live Events channel is here now to showcase your corporate, individual, or organization's live event. Visit voiceamerica.com/live events to see all of our past live events and find out more. Whether it's a multi-day conference, special speaker, or single-day event, we've got everything to make your event a success. We can do a few hours or a few days. For more information about taking your event to the next level, call Jeff Spinard at 480-294-6417 or email info@voiceamerica.com. Again, that's Jeff Spinard at 480-294-6417 or send us an email to info@voiceamerica.com. Voice America is where you are and where you want to be. Join us around the globe as we broadcast live from some of the most interesting events available. Don't forget to view all our live events, including on-demand access to past events that you may have missed by visiting voiceamerica.com/live events.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Scott Carney, and we're discussing his book, What Doesn't Kill Us. So, Scott, before the break, we talked about the benefits of cold exposure, and we talked about the cold shower. And, of course, you stood in the snow when you went to see Wim Hof. Are there other ways that people can expose themselves to cold to challenge this part of themselves?
Well, I think the easiest is certainly the cold shower, right? I mean, because that is just something that is available to everyone, just in their house. And, in the summer, I'm in Denver right now, so we have pretty warm weather. It's a little harder to access, but we can find mountain streams, and we can find, some of the lakes here are still reasonably cold. And what you want to do is get into those places and really try to work on this mental reaction that you have to that external stimulus. And really, it's about relaxing. It's about trying not to trigger that instinctual response, which is related to panic, and just start to feel okay with your surroundings. And this is actually a very deep practice, because what you're doing is you're asserting your mental control over these unconscious physical responses. And the more you do that, the more you're able to actually gain control of other parts of your body that you don't really access ordinarily. Now, if you want to build up, the stronger the stimulus, the more of this sort of inner strength you build. So your cold shower might run at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or maybe 50 degrees Fahrenheit. If you can find ice water, which can be like literally putting a couple bags of store-bought ice in your bathtub and sitting there, that's a little better. And you can work up to more and more intense stimulus. And the thing is that you can push those extremes really far. At the end of that week in Poland, I ended up climbing up a mountain there. It's basically a ski slope. I spent 8 hours on the mountain, and just in a bathing suit and hiking boots. I think I may have had a hat on as well. But bare chested in this snowy environment, and I was there for 8 hours, and it was about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. That's sort of just a power that you develop very quickly if you do this. You don't need to be in extremely amazing health when you do it, but one of the keys here is to have as much skin available to the environment as possible, and that's not just because it looks flashy or whatever. What it is that you're actually exposing more nerve endings to the environment, and that's sending stronger signals to your body that you can then work with.
So when you climbed that mountain, how was that different from where you were at the beginning of that week that you spent with him?
Sure. Well, I had lived I'd been living in Los Angeles for about 4 years before I met Wim, and I'd flown directly from there. And I hate the cold. Like I hate it, and found it very uncomfortable. And just like pretty much everyone I tell about this sort of basic method of cold exposure, they'll always say, and I'm pretty sure all of your listeners are thinking this too, well, some people may handle the cold, but me, especially me, I can't do it. It's just hard for me. And the thing is that everyone says this because all of our relationship with discomfort is in some case overblown. And we think that it's something which is just horrible. And that was my view before I went to meet Wim. Like I didn't think that it would be something that I would be able to handle. But the surprising thing is that it happens very quickly. That adaptation starts to take place in just a couple of days, which is amazing. And the other amazing thing that to sort of prove that he and probably the reason why I first sort of thought that Wim was onto something was his breathing technique, which is, the Wim Hof method is basically two things. It's cold exposure and when relaxing in that cold, and then there is this, sort of daily breathing method. And essentially what you do is take these long, short, quick, deeply controlled breaths, and they would sound something like this. And you take about 30 of those breaths. And at the end of that, you exhale completely, so your lungs are empty, and you hold your breath. And as you do this, you hyperventilate essentially, and then you exhale and hold your breath. At first, you might be able to hold your breath for like 30 seconds or something like that. The second round I did that, I could hold my breath for a minute. And every morning, what I do now is I increase my breath hold times to up to 3 minutes at a stretch. And so I'll hyperventilate, I'll hold my breath for 1 minute, I'll hyperventilate, I'll hold my breath for 2 minutes, and the third I'll hyperventilate and hold my breath for 3 minutes. 3 minutes sounds like an insane amount of time, and I knew before I did this I could only hold my breath for about 30 seconds. So there was something about that breathing method that really radically increased this sort of autonomic ability of mine to just hold my breath. And then what you do in his method is that you do push-ups. And I knew that before I went to visit Wim Hof that I could do about 20 normal push-ups. I wasn't in great shape, wasn't in terrible shape, but 20 was about my number. And then when I did his breathing method, you do this hyperventilation and breath retention. And then he tells me to exhale all the air from my lungs and just start doing push-ups. And I did 40 without any air in my lungs. And that was amazing because it was literally doubling that physical ability I had to do push-ups with just a breathing method. And the cool thing here is that you're actually, by using this breathing, you're affecting these autonomic response to gasp when you need to hold your breath. If you hold your breath, at some point you're going to want to take in more air into your body. You exhale the carbon dioxide and let in more oxygen. By doing these sort of basic body hacks, you're working on that ability that your body has to sort of delay that gasp point. And you learn it so quickly. I went from 30 seconds to 3 minutes. It was really cool. And essentially, that gas point and the delaying of that gas point is the same skill you use to suppress shivering when you're in a cold shower or when you're in cold water. It's the same sort of mental trick. And realizing that those two things are related, let me understand that you can use these sorts of techniques to affect lots of different autonomic systems in the body.
So, so why would we want to work up to holding our breath for 3 minutes? What are you challenging?
Well, one, you're helping your sort of like oxygen saturation, your ability to move oxygen around your body and allowing for tolerances in your respiration processes. But what you're also doing is this mental trick, right? Just as important as the breathing, right, is the ability to express your will, your mental will, over that physical process, over that physical response to gasp, and that helps you modulate your stress. It helps you modulate sort of these unconscious things that affect us every day. So, you're really doing two things. One, you're sort of working your lungs, you're working your sort of mental grit, and you're sort of cracking into your unconscious biology.
So in Wim Hof's method, he also does meditation. What exactly is he doing there?
Well, this is the meditation. That's the really cool thing about the Wim Hof method is that, usually we think about meditation as this sort of act where you're sort of turning off all of your mental awareness or focusing on a point or a mantra or something like this. But Wim Hof's meditation is very physical. It's this, by hyperventilating, you'll get dizzy. Your limbs may tingle. All of these sort of physical things force you into your center. And that's why it's a really powerful meditation, is that it does all those goals that you want in sort of mindfulness meditation, but it actually forces your body into that point so quickly. I mean, there's nothing like jumping into cold ice water to make you realize exactly how situated in your body you really are. And that mental focus you use to relax is a very powerful self-centering technique.
So you took a 6-month challenge to do Wim Hof's method, and you got studied. What happened for you in that time?
Yeah, so what that challenge was, and this was several years after I met Wim Hof, I had decided to practice his breathing method every morning, take cold showers every day, and exercise outdoors in minimal clothing. What else did I do? And jump into ice water whenever it was available and I could, or roll in the snow if it was snowing and that sort of thing. And before I did this, I got my metabolism studied at the Boulder Center for Sports Medicine, which is a very good sort of sports medicine center here in the Boulder, Denver area. And, they tested my VO2 max. They tested what sorts of things my body metabolizes for energy. You can burn carbohydrates, you can burn fats. And they found that I was a pretty normal dude at the very beginning of this. I burned mostly carbohydrates when I was running. And I had a pretty okay VO2 max. After 6 months of this training, when I was writing this book, where I was literally only adding about 15 minutes of breathing and then cold showers every day, in addition to my normal exercise routine, what happened is that I went from primarily a carbohydrate burner to primarily a fat burner, because my metabolism had changed in relation to the cold. I'd also increased my VO2 max. And when I asked the doctor who was studying me what sort of this means outside of the scientific jargon, he said it was the equivalent of me adding about 7 hours of cardio workout to my routine every week. When in reality, all I was doing was adding about 15 minutes of extra work. So that was pretty cool, is that when you start thinking about modulating the environment and your breathing, that also works in a similar manner to exercise, and in some ways even more efficiently.
Well, that is pretty cool, because most people don't want to add 7 hours of workout to their routine every week. And, we all take showers, so we can add the cold part at the end, and then you just do the breathing every day. Mm-hmm. And you maximized the use of everything. Did you lose weight as well in that time, just doing all of that?
I did. At the end of the whole project, I was down to 178 after that sort of 6 months of training, and I think I came down from I was about 198 when I started, maybe 195. So pretty significant for just doing environmental training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So in your book, you talk about brown fat. Can you just explain that a little bit? Because you talk about that when you're talking about this study as well.
Sure. Well, so brown fat is one of these metabolic tissues. You know how I mentioned that when you relax, you will start turning instead of using your muscles to heat yourself, you'll use a metabolic action, and you'll activate mitochondria. Now, brown fat is one of these very mitochondrial-rich tissues that humans have, and most people. Let me say that's not the right word. So, when you're born, the first challenge that human infants have to survival is maintaining a body temperature, maintaining 98.6. And this is why you put sick babies, and premature babies into incubators, because you're trying to give them that sort of, the ability to keep that body temperature. Now, for infants, the issue for them not able to keep their body temperature up is because the way we heat ourselves mostly is with digestion, it's with muscle movement. And infants have no real musculature when they're born, and their digestive system is pretty bad. The other way you can heat yourself is with your circulation. Their circulation is also bad. So instead, what infants are born with are these big, fat baby rolls. You can picture an infant, and they have lots of rolls of fat. Well, they also, in addition to sort of those white fat baby rolls, they have this tissue called brown adipose tissue, or brown fat, which lines their spines and across their shoulders and also in their thorax. And what its job is to do is simply suck white fat from their bodies and burn it directly for heat energy. And this is how all of us survived when we were first born. Now, until about the mid-2000s, we didn't really realize, we thought that brown fat disappeared in humans as we aged up. As by the time we hit 20 or 22, it would be just like a teaspoon of brown fat, because we thought of it just as vestigial tissue that only infants used. And then between 2004 and 2007, doctors at Harvard discovered that people who live in constantly cold environments don't actually lose their brown adipose tissue. And the reason that they thought that we lost is just because all the people they were studying had lived in climate-controlled environments. So now there's this huge research study going on. The National Institutes of Health invested about $1 billion in trying to understand how we can maximize and grow brown fat. Most of these studies are trying to develop a pharmaceutical pill that you'll take that will create brown fat, so it will essentially be this miracle weight loss pill. But the truth is, if you want to grow it, all you have to do is expose yourself to cold, and your body will simply generate this tissue.
Well, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, it's pretty encouraging. We're going to take a quick break. We're talking today with Scott Carney, and we're discussing his book, What Doesn't Kill Us. So we'll be back shortly.
Opinions, options, answers. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
Take us on the go. It's even easier now. The Voice America Talk Radio Network has launched our mobile app for iPhone, Android, or BlackBerry. Visit the Apple iTunes App Store, BlackBerry App World, or Android Market to download the app powered by Aircast. It's free and no registration is necessary. In minutes, you could be enjoying your favorite Voice America Talk Radio host, no matter where you are, in the car, out and about, while traveling, or anytime you can't be close to your computer. Catch up on the archives you've missed or discover new shows on the spot. Search Voice America at your favorite app store.
What causes us to be sick? We're not talking about the actual illness or the scientific cause of illnesses. We're talking about your body and health. Listen for the healing whisper of return to peace. Each week, host Dr. Marianne Chase shows you how to listen to your heart to identify poor health, stress, and disease. You'll learn how to heal energetically and spiritually as well as physically. It's time to depend less on the drugs and more on the heart. The Healing Whisper airs live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Follow the Voice America Talk Radio Network on Twitter. We're at Voice America TRN. You'll get the latest fix on what's happening with our shows, this week's featured guests, and general happenings that you should know about at the Voice America Talk Radio Network. Now you don't have to miss anything when you're away from your home or office. Just go to twitter.com/Voice America TRN or follow along with us at Voice America TRN, the Voice America Talk Radio Network. We're on the cutting edge of social media. Can you keep up?
Opinions, options, answers. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Scott Carney, and we're discussing his book, What Doesn't Kill Us. So, Scott, there was a study done with Wim Hof on endotoxins. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So the endotoxin study is really the point where Wim Hof sort of showed that he wasn't just sort of spiritual flim-flam, is that he had actual control over his body. And what it is that he made this claim to an immunologist in Holland, saying that he could consciously suppress his immune system, which means that using his mental tricks or whatever it is, he could turn off immune responses, which, to give you some context, that would be an amazing feat for anyone suffering from any sort of autoimmune illness where your body's attacking itself. Unfortunately, that was technically considered physically impossible because there's no connection between the brain and the immune system, or that's what scientists thought at the time. And so what the test was, it was designed by this immunologist to test immune rejection drugs. So think about anything that might help you if you got an organ transplant. They need drugs that will turn off your immune system so the immune system won't eat that kidney that you just got from a donor. And what it is it's this bacteria called endotoxin, which is essentially E. coli bacteria that's been killed in a lab. So it's not actually toxic. It doesn't actually attack the body, but it does have the cytokines and the cell markers on it that would tell the immune system to attack it. So if you're injected with endotoxin, what happens? You get a fever, you get achy joints, you get the normal things that would feel like the flu is coming on. And 99% of people who get injected with endotoxin get these symptoms. Well, what happened with Wim Hof is he went into the lab, said that he could not have that response. They injected him, and were testing his blood and trying to understand what would happen to his body, and nothing happened. He had literally no or barely any immune response. He complained of only a minor headache. Even more interesting is that his blood, after being removed from his body, remained resistant to the endotoxin for 3 days in the laboratory. This was a crazy experiment. And the doctors at the time were like, well, this is, makes us consider some of our basic medical assumptions about the immune system. But they made the caveat that maybe Wim is this just genetic freak. Maybe he's this guy who just has some ability. We said 99% of people could resist it, would have that response. There's still that 1% of weird outliers who might work differently. So then 1 year later, they designed another experiment where they took I believe it was 12 college students from Holland, and they did the same training that I did with Wim in Poland, which was, rolling in the snow and learning his breathing techniques, eventually climbing a mountain, several miles from his house in their underwear. And they came back, and then the scientists injected all of them with endotoxin, and they had the same results as Wim, which is amazing because it showed that not only did this technique work for Wim, but that it was teachable to other people. And this has been the study that we go back to over and over again, and that they're still conducting follow-up research on to show that, using these techniques, you could actually, and not just suppressing your shiver response or not just expanding the amount of time that you can hold your breath. What you're actually doing is affecting these very deep structures in your body and literally affecting these systems that should be unconscious.
This is really interesting because, we believe that we can't control our immune system except maybe some pharmaceutical drugs or some supplements that we don't have control. And of course, that's obviously not the case.
Right. And it's miraculous. It's so cool. And it's not just only in the laboratory that this works. When I went there and I visited lots of people who Wim knows, this is after Poland. I went in and visited people around Holland who were using his techniques, and I met several people, dozens of people really, who claimed that these breathing techniques and these cold exposures helped them with a variety of autoimmune illnesses. I met a guy who was suffering from crippling rheumatoid arthritis. So we're talking about those plum-sized joints in your knuckles and your feet that you get when you're older, which is essentially your immune system attacking the area in your joints. He was able to reverse that rheumatoid arthritis in the course of probably 6 months of these breathing exercises. I met another guy who had Crohn's disease, which is, you think about, it's basically ulcers that went from his mouth all the way out to his rectum, thousands of these ulcers. He was able to reverse that in 6 months and he attributes this to the cold exposure. I also met a guy who was using the Wim Hof methods for his Parkinson's disease, and although it didn't cure it, he said that it had drastically reduced his dependence on the drugs that he was using. Now, these are, of course, anecdotes. They're not sort of rigorous medical trials with tens of thousands of people using it. But what was fascinating is to meet a whole variety of people who are really seeing these dramatic effects. And when you put that in the context of the endotoxin study, it's really impressive.
Yeah, it is definitely. I mean, when you're looking at any of those illnesses, people just live with them and they continue to suffer. And, the medications will cover up symptoms and they'll have side effects. And if we can have, more control over our body, I think we need to embrace whatever it is that's going to work. And this actually seems fairly simple compared to some other things. I mean, really, a cold shower every day is not complicated once you adjust to it. And you're saying it doesn't even take that long.
No, it's pretty easy. And, and also, let's go back to some evolutionary stuff here. Is if we evolved in an environment that was constantly changing, right? Those changes are ingrained in our biology, right? That our bodies just assume that those changes will be out there. And 100 years is nothing in evolution. That's a blink of an eye in terms of us passing on genes and moving around. So our bodies are still expecting changes. And one of the assumptions that we're making in this book and in these guesses is that the immune system is also attached to that overarching system of recognizing changes. But we live in these sterile environments. We live in a place where there's no variation in the temperatures. And if you think about the immune system as a predator, right, something that's there to go attack the stuff that goes, that might be attacking your body, then what these temperature variations are doing is essentially giving that predator a chew toy, because that predator is bored right now. It doesn't have anything to do. It's not getting the stimulus that it needs. So by giving it some external stimuli, you give it essentially something to do. Now, that's not a medical explanation, but that's sort of metaphorically how I think about how this is working.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. One thing in this journey that you did with Wim Hof is you climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and what you did was also pretty special. Can you tell us what that journey was?
Yeah, so I wanted to end the book showing that, you're able to do some really crazy things, right? I wanted to have a big event. And so Wim Hof was leading this expedition up to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, where he would be doing two things. One, going shirtless, and in shorts up to the top. And that's just to prove that we could resist the elements. And it got down to, with wind chill at the sort of the last stretch of Kili, it got to about -30. And I was able to be outside with my skin bare to the cold for most of that time in that temperature, just using these mental tricks, which is amazing. But even more interesting than that is that Kilimanjaro has only about a 60% success rate for people who want to climb it. And it's not because Kilimanjaro is a difficult mountain to climb. It's actually more or less a hike. There's no technical sides. You don't need ropes or anything like that. But the reason it has such a low success rate is because of altitude sickness. You're going from a very low altitude to a very high altitude, and as you go up, the air pressure decreases so that you're able to put less oxygen into your body. And so it takes 5 days to get to the top. 5 to 10 usually is how long it takes to get to the summit. And you stop every couple hours to just let your body build up more red blood cells to carry more oxygen so that you can actually get to the top. But even then, 40% of people fail. What we did instead was we used his breathing method, which was basically hyperventilating, that deep, fast breathing. And we just went straight to the top, and I managed to get to the top with this group of about 30 people in just 28 hours, which is blisteringly fast. It's not a world record, but it defies the idea of this altitude sickness. And we had I believe a 90% success rate up to the top, which is amazing because it shows that you can actually affect your response to decreased pressure, decreased oxygen saturation by using these breathing techniques.
That's when I read that, it was pretty interesting because, most of you made it up there and, and in such a fast time, just by doing this simple method.
Mm-hmm. Totally, and the applications for anyone who's a mountaineer are great because usually what they say is that the only way to counteract altitude sickness is to decrease your altitude. You have to you climb, and if you start to get those symptoms, which is swelling in your limbs, dizziness, loss of coordination in general, and eventually fluid in the lungs and death. That's what happens with altitude sickness. And the only treatment was to bring someone down. But now what we know with the Wim Hof method is if you breathe hard all the way up your ascent, you're counteracting the major effects of altitude sickness. Or at least that's what we did. And there's also a scientific paper that I cite where there was the year before I did this, wilderness emergency medicine doctor did a study on the people who ascended and showed that this works.
Well, it's encouraging, even if you're just, I love all these stories of how well something so simple works. Because when you take people that are sick, which I think most of you were, and then you in 6 months can turn it around to actually climbing Mount Kilimanjaro successfully. I think it can give a lot of people who aren't well a lot of hope as well, that they have the tools and available to them to help themselves with very little cost to them as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't need to buy a drug. You don't need to. I mean, there's nothing external that you need to start working at this other than some bag of advice, right? You can learn the Wim Hof breathing method online. Like you could just Google Wim Hof breathing method, and lots of people have YouTube videos. There's my book. There's just so many resources out there for people, it's super cheap, right? And there's really not much risk here in doing this. I mean, if it doesn't work for you, then just ditch it, and you're not really out anything other than maybe some cold showers and some cringeworthy events.
Cringeworthy is true until I get used to it, but I'm going to keep trying, and I'll see if I can relax in the shower. Just like everyone else, I think that cold is something that I don't enjoy and can't do, but I'm sure that it's like you said, it's just adjusting, acclimatizing to it.
That's right. It's something that happens quick, and you have to get out of the mindset that it's the worst thing in the world, right? There's a huge mental component of this because you're trying to assert your mental abilities over your physical body, and you just need to realize when you're doing that it's not so bad. It's not as bad as your mind lets you think it is. It's just mildly uncomfortable, and then eventually it becomes this buzz. It becomes, I'm doing this challenging thing, and it feels great to be able to do this.
So if there's anybody listening who wants more information, how can they get a hold of you or your book?
Well, I have all the normal platforms. You can find me on Facebook, Scott Carney, author page. There's a What Doesn't Kill Us author page. There is Twitter, SG Carney. You can really find me anywhere. The book is available on Amazon and in bookstores everywhere. It was a New York Times bestseller. And if you really like the sound of my voice, there's an audiobook too, where you get to listen to me for 8 straight hours or 9 straight hours or whatever it is. It's great. I'll keep you company all night.
That's awesome. Well, Scott, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. This was a great episode.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. Just be sure to make today a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive. Please join Dr. Rebecca Risk again next Monday at noon Eastern Time and 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel. We'll talk more next week.